Hello, hello. Happy Monday, everyone. This is the September 30th edition of the SIG release engineering subproject meeting. This is a meeting that is recorded and available on the internet, so please be mindful of what you say. Please be sure to adhere to the Kubernetes code of conduct, and in general, just be a really great person. So we've got one agenda item. We've got three. I'm going to put two more on. But Lubomir's here and he wants to talk a little bit about Kube-ADM, so I'm going to give him a chance to kick that off.
Do you have any preference to move this to the back of the agenda?
It dovetails with. I'll put the second second thing I talk about will be related. So it's fine to go first.
Okay, so we had a little bit of discussion about Kube-ADM moving out during the Kube-ADM office hours. So for those that don't know, the plan is to move Kube-ADM with the release of 118. At least that's what we promised to SIG architecture.
Okay.
But there are a lot of question marks, however, and some of them we have to ask SIG release. For instance, my first question is, because kubectl is already trailblazing this, well, they're using staging, but they already have plans to move out and use a different versioning. Did you guys have discussion with the SIG CLI folks in terms of how are we going to release kubectl?
Personally, no one has come to me, at least, or opened issues or talked to SIG. It's possible that there's a discussion happening that I'm not a part of. Tim, you're here. Have you heard anything specifically related to that?
Nothing specific on mechanics of how we do that, no.
Okay. So for everyone who is on the call, do me a favor, and I'm dropping some stuff in the chat. Do me a favor and pop your name on the agenda if it's not already there. If I could have a note taker, that would be super awesome.
Yeah, so perhaps what we want to do is, I don't know, book another meeting with the SIG CLI folks, SIG Quest Lifecycle, SIG Release. Maybe a single cap can be used to target both projects moving out.
Okay. That is a potential possibility. Yeah, absolutely. We have some caps that will be that we want to write up for the beginning of this cycle, around a lot around artifacts in general. How do we build, package, publish, all that good stuff? So I wonder if it makes sense to work on those together. The state of the game right now is essentially they all get built together. The way our packaging tools work, it almost requires you to build everything at the same time. The way everything is kind of like chained together. So the second agenda item actually is a PR for me that separates. So if you look at Kubernetes release poll 884. It's a PR that actually starts to separate the, at least on the deb side, the way we build different packages. So it allows you to build individual packages for individual versions for individual channels of Kubernetes, right? So stable, unstable, what did we decide to call them, Tim? Release, testing, and nightly are the channels, right? And those map to stable releases of Kubernetes, pre-releases of Kubernetes, and then CI builds of Kubernetes. The reason I went after the debs first is because it's harder to do. The RPMs are essentially spec files, are one spec file that should be broken into multiple spec files. Additional problem there is that essentially if the spec file changes right now, it changes across all versions, right? we don't have any sense of versioning there. So if I build if I build Kubernetes 113 today, debs or RPMs for Kubernetes 113 today, and so that definition could be wildly different from the way we built 113.0, right? So the idea behind this PR was essentially to lock in, to allow, so one, to be able to build arbitrary versions. So if I say to the deb builder right now to build.go dash packages kubectl and kubeadm and CRI tools or something, right? Channels, stable, and testing are channels. What are we calling them? Release and testing, right? I'll get a set of packages for the release and testing channel across for kubectl, kubeadm, and CRI tools, right? So the idea there was to be able to do exactly something like this. If someone wanted to build arbitrary versions for arbitrary packages for arbitrary versions for arbitrary channels, they'd be able to, right? I wanted to prove out that it could be done on the deb side, which is the harder side to do before, like the RPM should be fairly easy. Tim actually had a PR open for this that was open a while ago and closed it. I think you still have the branch active, Tim, for breaking out those RPM files.
Yeah, but I think it'll get completely redone to be the same Go basis as the other. And
Yeah, so I was looking at it and I actually tried to rebase it and it's like, ooh, no, maybe just rewrite this and attribute Tim. It's yeah. So it looks simple enough to do, but essentially what we want is that being able to kind of hermetically seal some of the definitions across different versions, so that when we move through, when we do a new release and we change the way we change like the version of a dependency or something like that, we can still lock it in per version, right? So one of the issues that we've had in the past, and Lubomir, I think you're aware, Fabrizio, you might have also been on this issue, where I think Kubernetes 115, 114 came out, and there was a dependency change that caused breakage in Kubernetes CNI. Because it was locked to Kubernetes CNI 060. Our dependencies were equal to 060, so basically new versions of Kubernetes CNI that were in the stream, which included the 075 when it came out, caused breakage for anyone trying to install kubeadm, right? So, so we want to definitely prevent some of that, but in order to do it, there is a sneakier problem underneath, which is the fact that we publish all packages to essentially the same stream, right? Which means the same apt and yum repos, which means when we break if we break something or if we publish a new version, any dependencies that have like a greater than or equals to will, if I install 113 today, right, I might get a different package set than I would if I installed it when 113.0 came out, right?
and importantly, you'd get something different than what was ever tested by the community.
Exactly, right. So there are an infinite amount of of combinations that have been untested by the community, which makes it I was going to say dangerous, but inadvisable to publish new packages of certain dependencies. So what we need to do, and Tim and I have been talking about this, and we have a doc that is around, and this is what I was referring to that needs to get migrated into K8s, is here. So this is the release engineering brainstorm, and this is basically the work product of, I think, Tim and I sitting on the phone for like 6 hours over a few days, as well as the conversations that we've had with multiple people. I don't think it was meant to be 6 hours. We just got to chatting and enjoyed ourselves or something. But yeah, so this is a lot of that. So talking about how we host what we do with artifacts, if we can describe the artifacts, right? If we know what the build process is, there are lots of hidey holes for our build process, as well as the tools that we use and whether or not the tools that we use today are the right ones, right? So all of that to say that we're stuck for the moment. I think I would like to understand what people are interested in doing as it relates to kubectl and kubeadm. In a perfect world, I feel like they're already flowing through our kind of build process, and it would make sense to keep them together. But that is only on the basis of knowing what I know about the tools today. Like, I think there is a level of choreography that would be required if we start breaking things out, especially due to the fact that the build process ends with a Googler doing the build, signing the images and pushing them to a Google repo, right? So we have limited flexibility in that last mile of the step, in that last mile of the process. So let me make sure this is on. So I've been rambling for a while. People, thoughts on that?
In your brainstorm session, did you discuss whether our current release tools are going to be capable to take a certain commit from an external repository that is not tagged the same way as Kubernetes, and build a binary and package that into the tarballs? Because, yeah,
mhm.
kubectl want to do that exactly.
Okay. That should be possible. We'd have to tweak some things. Essentially, we assume that all of our builds are based on the version marker files, right? And so for people who are not familiar with the version marker files, essentially what we do after every build, whether it is, so if you're curious about looking into the stuff, it is the CI-Kubernetes-build job in TestGrid. And that maps to the push build script within K-release, which essentially the last mile of that script is to push a version tag for the repo. So essentially, we could do it. We'd have to build something, or we'd have to fit it into the structure that we have today. We could talk about ways to make that better. I think today, right now, it's not bad. Essentially, if you ask for a version of Kubernetes, you will. So if it recognizes the version of Kubernetes, it will. Let me go back. It'll give you a 404 if it doesn't recognize the version of Kubernetes. Essentially, what it's doing is going to download.k8s.io / version marker file, right? / release / version marker file, right? So some of the files that you might see in are latest.txt, right? So latest.txt or K8s stable.txt, right? Latest.txt will give you the latest CI build, the latest, and it could either be a AMD 64 build or a cross build, right? The K8s master K8s-master.txt will give you a cross build of Kubernetes, right? So there are a bunch of different marker files that you can use to choose which version you're going to get. We could do something similar with both kubeadm and kubectl and detangle. Essentially, a lot of the script assumes that version gets passed from that version is used in kubeadm, kubectl, and the kubelet, right? And then the Kubernetes CNI and CRI tools packages think about that version, right? They may use it to, so like right now I have I have something in that PR to essentially hard code the not hard code, well, yeah, hard code the dependency. So if you so like for the kubelet, right, we have a discussion about removing Kubernetes CNI, or rather moving the dependency of Kubernetes CNI from the Kubernetes CNI package itself and moving that down to the kubelet, right? So that way people can still leverage the CNI, the default CNI plugins. People who are already consuming the deb packages can use the CNI plugins, the default CNI plugins, without any breakages, right? So we're essentially planning on deprecating that Kubernetes CNI package, but continuing to publish the things that are inside of that package, right? So like in that case, there's tiny magic that essentially looks at your version and says like, oh, are you below 117? Okay, well, I'm going to lock your version of CNI to 0.75, right? Because everything beyond that has not been tested, right? So there, and then also for CRI tools is essentially CRI tools release timing is supposed to be timed with the upstream Kubernetes release. What ends up happening, and that's kind of a fault of our tool, is that the CRI tools packages are actually not published unless they are the minimum version that's set in those scripts, right? So like right now in our stream, we have, because that minimum version is also used as part of the dependency, right? So, and that's essentially to make sure that, you know, right now it's CRI tools 113, right? And that's to make sure that 113 works, right? But because we have this essentially delay in package versions for like CRI tools, that means that the tools that use that may leverage CRI tools within Kubernetes use 113 as well, right? Which means CRI tools 116 is not tested with 116, right? So there's magic in that PR that will also prevent you from upgrading to upgrading to versions that we haven't tested, right? So there are lots of little things that we can tweak. Definitely want to hear more from everyone about what we think we should do, because it's stuff that we have been thinking about, but definitely makes sense to have as many minds in the room as possible now that we've been chewing on it for a little bit.
So originally we were thinking that for kubeadm we should match the release process with the Kubernetes release process. kubectl, to my knowledge, are going to decouple completely in both versioning and basically the schedule of the release. So I like the idea with the markers, but maybe we can simply, when we pull a repository, we can get the latest stack. And that's, the Kubernetes train is not going to wait for the project. If the latest tag is already up, we get that and we release Kubernetes with this particular version.
Okay, yeah, I mean that seems fine. I know I'm gonna answer you, and then I know I see Fabrizio has his hands up. So yeah, no, I think that would be fine. I actually, the last commit that I did for that PR does stuff to figure out what tag you should match CRI tools to. So it's totally possible. I think it's fairly simple to add pieces to search for the latest version, or build on commit. Build on commit is close enough to what we do for the CI builds today, right? So if you ask for latest, it does pull the version marker, but it's not too much of a stretch of the imagination to instead use commit. So. And Fabrizio?
I have a more generic question, because I see, I understand all the mechanics you are talking about, but I see the release process in, let me say, more from a developer perspective, and from a developer perspective, the release process has some implication, like the branch strategies. One the new branch is creating, like the code freeze, code tow, and all the cherry picking stuff. So my consideration is, okay, we are moving kubadmin out of 3, but we think that it is beneficial for the community having kubadmin part of the main package. And we want to really to kubadmin continuing being part of the main package. That means that even if kubadmin is in a separated repo, we would like to have the same release process, including all the mechanics that the developer are, let me say, guided through by the release team. And of course, arriving to the all the tooling which is necessary to do the build. This is one first point, and my second point is that it will be. I don't know if you are considering this on top of your list, but it will be great if we can get to merge the CI/CD build process and the release process, because basically we have all our end-to-end signal based on a different release process now.
Yeah, so that is, I definitely agree there that we have a disconnect between, so there are, for people who are not aware, there are essentially package definitions, RPM spec files, so on and so forth, in Kubernetes. That's in Kubernetes/build/debs or RPMs, choose your poison. And those are available, and essentially those run through CI. So the versions that we test against, and I believe right now it's single architecture AMD 64, right? Bazel doesn't handle cross-building, right?
As far as I know, yes, we test mostly on Ubuntu.
Okay, right. So you take that and you compare it with the actual specs that are used for publishing Kubernetes, at least for the debs and RPMs, and those are in K-release/build/debs and RPMs, right? So the stuff that we are using is is not the same as the stuff we're testing, which is bad. And we want to change that. There's an open issue that I believe is called K8s, the canonical source for all something artifacts. That I believe that to be true. Or I think parts of that should be true. However, just kind of the way we're set up today, kind of if we put the release tools in Kubernetes, it starts to make me question whether or not we need a Kubernetes release repo, right? Part of the reason I like having a separate repo for the release tools means that we can move on our own cadence in releasing these things. I think if possible, we define the specs maybe in Kubernetes and pull them into the repo, pull them into the release repo and maintain the tooling there. But it almost makes sense for the tooling and the specs to live in the same place. So maybe Kubernetes, in doing CI, the CI should not be based on the CI should be based on a commit, but it should be CI targeted against the release repo that runs on commits of the Kubernetes repo, right? If that made sense. Maybe. Fabrizio,
Yes,
Lubomir? Yeah.
definitely. So the main point there is that Tim St. Clair wanted Kubernetes to be the source of truth, but I think that people are going to agree that we just need a single location for both CI and the release process. Can I quickly comment on Fabrizio's first point?
Sure.
Matching the tooling between KK and KQBADM, for example. This is going to be hard because the tooling is not ready completely not ready to handle that. If we want to have code toe in the kubeadm repo, or if we want to basically fast forward a branch or automate the branch creation process, the tooling in K-release are not ready to handle another repository, basically. And also I think we can simplify the process. We don't have to follow the process exactly. The main point is that we should, the tooling should be able to pick the right commits from the kubeadm branches to build, for instance, kubeadm 1.14 latest to be able to test in CI. That I think is the trickiest part.
Exactly, right. So I feel like today it's easier if we keep the builds together. But it sounds like it's sounding more and more like we're at a point where we need to gather requirements from both the kubeadm folks as well as the kubectl folks. Because Tim and I have had ideas, and those ideas need to match what the community is hoping for. We need to build around that. So.
Thank you for the answer. I just comment on the point of the process. I think that, okay, we can simplify the process for kubeadmin, but I see also value in having the same process. And because this process has strength, it forces the developer to stabilize things with a well-defined cadence, and it avoid the risk that when the build is created, there is something not correct in the process. So there are pros and cons. I'm of course open to find the way that fits all the stakeholder around this table, but we should be careful to introduce a different release process for kubeadmin, because simply otherwise we have to document it, make the developer aware, and synchronize with the release team. They have to manage two different release cycle, potentially 3, because kubectl will have its own.
Mm-hmm.
So having, let me say, all the projects that should go in the same bundle, follow the same process, maybe is beneficial for all the actors.
Yeah, so you are actually you're helping Tim and I build our KubeCon talk right now. We're going to be talking about the state of release engineering tooling and all that good stuff. Yeah, and I think that right now today, like we have enough tricky and sticky and things to think about that it makes a lot of sense to keep all of the tooling together, keep the way that we release together. In the future, what I would love to see is we write a tool, right? And I can provide it any package, being reasonable, right? I can provide it any package, and it can or any definition, right? And it will spit out a package, right? And hopefully this could be used for, like, why not build a tool that everyone can use, right? It would be cool if like every repo could use this, right? And I know this is like far in the future, but like writing a tool that essentially, like, here's what we're going to do with the tool, right? The building any one artifact for a repo in Kubernetes, fairly simple, right? You write a script in your repo, you tie it up with CI, you land it in a GCS bucket, right? Nothing too complicated there. The second part of that is then consuming those artifacts and maybe turning them into different artifacts, right? So the devs and RPMs. It would be lovely if we said, like, these are the expected inputs for the tool, and this is what you can get out of it, right? If it's dev and RPM packages. We are far away from being able to arbitrarily provide that for any repo. Sure, some people may say that is maybe a non-goal overall for some of our tooling, but I think that today it makes sense to, and this is part of the talking about is Kubernetes a distribution now, right? Is like the things that we've Kubernetes as the kernel and the things that we build around it, right? So everything that we publish on the dev and RPM side, so the kubectl, kubelet, kubeadm, Kubernetes CNI, and CRI tools, we package as a bundle and we toss it in the same repo, right? Is that what we would consider to be, a distribution, the cloud native distribution now, right? So that's part of what the talk is going to talk about. But like today, it makes sense for all of these things that we consider to be that bundle to be in the same place, to be built the same way, to use similar specs, right? So I've been talking a lot. Do people have opinions on this? Do people have more opinions outside of Lubomir and Fabrizio?
If nobody has opinion, I have one. Well, this is in an ideal world, we can have the same tooling for all the repos, all the subprojects. But the problem is that kubectl is moving pretty soon. Like the recent update said that they are almost done. They're moving to staging, which means that tagging and branching is going to be handled by the publishing bot for now. But I guess in the future they want to completely decouple the release process. They don't want to have code tau. It's going to be a completely separate app. On the kubeadm side, Fabrizio wants to have a very similar release process. But realistically speaking, this is more of a question, do you guys think that we can enable our current tooling to support this separate repository scenario by the time 1.18 is released? My guess is going to be no, which means that we have to release and manage kubeadm in a somehow different process. I'm also seeing things like the manual fast forwarding that currently happens in KK. We don't have automation for that, so which means that we cannot apply it to kubeadm. So somebody manually has to fast forward kubeadm as well. There are many, yeah.
Yeah, so there's a reason for that, right? And that's actually for we could wire this up to we could wire this up to CI fairly easily. Fairly easily, but part of the goal of having a manual process around the branch fast forward is so that a person can introspect on the commits that are being fast forwarded into that branch. And I still think that that's pretty important, especially because we do stuff like the fast forward tool also does stuff like update the Open API spec, right? So it runs it basically finds a and some of the Git wizardry. I think it finds a base commit for the two branches that match, and it tries to start from there and fast forwards. And I think maybe we can learn something from the way the publishing bot does what it does, and maybe pull some of that knowledge in. But essentially, it does that. It finds the base commit, it does the fast forward, and then it applies some scripts on top of that branch, and then creates a merge commit for that, and you inspect that piece, and then push it up, right?
The alternative there would potentially be that as we move towards things that are more branched and moving at more cadences, that you have more of a sort of feature branch type workflow where larger things are developed for a period and tested, and then there's somebody who's a merge master. Instead of, right now we have these GitHub based pull requests that are really about merging a commit or a small number of commits and cherry picks similarly to the stable branches. You might imagine a workflow where there's a human who's a merge master and is merging in a whole tree of hundreds of commits once they're proven ready. And there, it might be a totally different style of automation that helps do that in a consistent way and give some quality guardrails like that fast forward automation. Because right now, the fast forward automation from the outside, I think people say, well, why does that even exist? Why, during this freeze period, why are we, what are we doing? And the end goal there, like Stephen said, is quality. And that's a human kind of process. So the different projects could, well, and I say different projects because I think we're really talking about splitting out to being a family of projects. Those other projects, whether kubectl, kubeadm, or anything else, they're going to handle that portion of their release flow differently potentially. And I feel like the tooling might not be super common there.
I got the point, both points from Lubomir, that probably we are the official tooling will not be ready, but also the point from team that each project might add specific needs.
So one thing,
my major concern is that as of today for Kubernetes, let me say, the release process is it follows the main release process. So we are a small team. We don't have to invest resources.
Yep.
And we follow up. If we go to something different, it will be a problem for a small team like the Kubernetes team, because you have to dedicate resources to do release management.
There is also an introduction of like a different process altogether, right? So, there may be certain guarantees around the way that we publish certain artifacts, right? That may not exist for your team, right? Or, the fact that certain things can only be done by certain people, right? So, people who have access to the Kubernetes release test bucket, or GCS bucket, or the Kubernetes release test project overall, are the ones who can run cloud builds on that project, which essentially do the staging and releasing for Kubernetes, right? So right now that list of people includes the SIG release shares, the patch release team, and the branch management side, right? In addition to the build admins on the Google side, right? So there are there are certain things that we do and don't want to open up, and we're still trying to assess that. There are certain things that we can pass through to automation as well, some of which we already do today. But in doing, in doing some of that, we have to consider the amount of hands that may touch certain artifacts and whether or not that's okay, right? That's not just for process sake, but it's also to protect the project and so far as considerations around releasing for CVEs and stuff like that, right? There are only certain people who should be doing some of this stuff, right? Now, I know I had a second point and it's gone. No. So yeah, so in terms of timeline for 118, I would love to be optimistic, but I'm going to be realistic instead and say that you're right. It probably won't happen. For 117, one of the big things that I want to take down is getting a workflow around building repos, right? So how do we build apt and yum repos, right? And then also how do we do the signing for the packages that may live in those repos? So it's an open question. I think it's going to be my white whale for 117. And I see that actually Linus is on the call. Linus, I'm curious to hear your perspective, especially as so for people who are not familiar, Linus is on the team at Google that also has access to the Kubernetes release test bucket, and that team, along with Alexandra, Sumi, Premdeep, are people who have access to build the debs and RPMs and publish them. So yeah, I'm actually curious if you have thoughts or what.
Sorry, what was the question? I heard a long introduction. I was like, yes.
You're like, yeah, that's me. That is me. Basically, what are your thoughts on all of this? Because a lot of what we're if we get to a point where we're just in we're just in CNCF or Kubernetes community managed apt and yum repos that are split out by versions or and channels, so nightly stable or nightly release and testing, that gives us a little bit more flexibility in what we do and what we land where. But given the process that you know today, what do you think about what we've been talking about?
So I've been trying to piece together the various notes here. So I actually have not been following the exact vocal conversations that's been going on because I joined the meeting quite late, as you know, might have noticed. But anyway, I looked at, for example, your PR number 884. I'm assuming that's what you're talking about at this exact moment.
So just in general, there, especially as it relates to like kind of the last mile, a Googler needs to do this steps. Like,
yes.
Coordination wise, what do you think?
I mean, I don't really see any reason why we couldn't do this like now. I mean, so just so that we're on the same page, my understanding of why we need to have a Googler do this last step thing is because Google, so we sign the packages when we release them or something like that. Because the app repos where we store them for public consumption, they are trusted. So that was my understanding. That was from another, I think that was Aaron who told me that. That's Spiff XP.
Yeah.
So if it's just a trust issue, then I don't see why we can't do this right now, as in moving out the publishing part to a different location.
We would, so I mean, part of that is we'd have to build that secondary location, right?
I mean, right.
but
I mean,
yeah.
So I'm not experienced with creating apt repos, but how hard is it? I mean, is it just? I would imagine it's just a server or set of servers somewhere, possibly a CDN or something if you want to get.
Yeah,
if you want it to get fancy, but.
I'm also going to say I'm not as familiar, but I think Tim is. I think it's essentially a web server, things right. In certain places, and GPG keys, right? I know I'm oversimplifying, Tim, but if you want to expand on that.
Yeah, close enough.
So really right now, I think the holdbacks that we have are the holdbacks from shifting too much in the process, and this is especially true with you take Rapture, right, which is I know very, very little about Rapture, right? Right, but essentially the Rapture has a set of expected inputs and outputs that we should Linus, we should talk about maybe this week if we can.
Sure.
That essentially, because we've been moving forward in the Kubernetes release repo, we have made changes to the way we build that are seemingly incompatible with Rapture. So we're currently held back on a earlier version of the repo, which we can't let continue. So we've got to sync up on that stuff. But I think figuring out especially like if we have a signing key that is, so like GCP supports storing things in an HSM. So I'm thinking a package signing key that lives in a CNCF or Kubernetes release GCP project. We can, if that happens, we can push more of the flow, definitely the Debs and RPM building into CI, right, and essentially have a package promotion process instead, right? So I know there have been discussions about a package promotion process, but
well, I just actually have a quick question. Like, wouldn't you want to just have an app repo set up and everything, and all of it working before you do a cutover? Like,
oh, absolutely. Like, right. we have to have that.
Yeah.
Part of the so that's like part of what I want to do for 117.
Well, like, what is the concern around having I guess, compatibility or something with Rapture? Because I think that was your question. Because there are some, like, you want to have a meeting of the ins and outs of Rapture before, or like this week? What would that clarify?
That would clarify for us like the stuff that we're building, right? Like once it lands on your computer or wherever you decide to build debs and RPMs, what happens afterwards, right? How are things signed? How do they get published up to the repo, right? This provides like valuable insight into how we should build our thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right now, our thing is broken for you, right? So you're having to build at an older commit. So we'd like to get it unbroken, but that takes some coordination to make sure that we're supplying the needful things.
Okay. I mean, we can set up a meeting later this week. That's fine.
Yeah. And I'm almost thinking maybe we should do it next week because I believe Tim, you're in Sofia, or getting ready to travel.
Yep.
Yeah. So Tim will be on a very, very bad time zone to try to coordinate. So maybe it makes sense to do that for next week. But it is something that we need to do early in the cycle, and start moving on. So yeah.
I guess so. I guess for those of you who will be seeing this from a recording, I guess the point is that because after you build the debs and RPMs, there are some additional steps that have to be done, such as signing, etc. We want to make sure that the new code more or less follows what we have been doing so far. I mean, because it's prior art, right? So you want to make sure it lines up.
Yep.
I mean, and also for those of you who are unfamiliar, like this code that we do to publish debs and RPMs, that sits inside Google's internal source code repo, so it's not public. So people in this call have been like piecing together the various like what goes on, like I don't know, like what does it do? So I think exposing that would be great. Yeah, I just want to sound.
Yeah. So that's kind of hit the nail on the head. All of the stuff that's kind of been on our minds. Essentially, we produce a set of outputs for a tool that we have no clue about, and we need to figure that out. So I think that's all been said. I will plan to schedule a meeting for a time that works for maybe you, Tim, Sumi, and I. Make sense?
Okay.
Yep. Yeah. So we've spent most of the meeting talking about this, and I think it's a valuable topic. I think it's one of the most important topics that we care about. I wanted to point out, so any questions, comments, concerns on some of that stuff? Okay, cool. All right. So the last agenda item was I took a first pass, and my go is atrocious, so I should put that disclaimer here. I took a first pass at rewriting one of the release tools, and it's not completely done yet. Again, first pass of rewriting one of our shell-based release tools to Go, and it went okay. There are still a few things I need to figure out, like how we do. So the tool in question is actually the branch fast forward tool that we were talking about earlier. So essentially what branch fast forward does is it finds a sane place to, sane point in time, sane commit to compare against two branches, fast forwards the contents of one of those branches onto the other, runs a set of scripts, and then allows a human to inspect, and then publishes or pushes that to Git, to some Git branch, right? So we have a problem, or is it a problem? Yeah, it's a problem. That a fair amount of our release tooling is written in Bash. That is not a problem in and of itself, but the complexity that we've reached with some of these tools would be nice if some of these things were written in a different language, in an actual more complete programming language. So and we get these niceties like like writing sane tests, right? As opposed to trying to introspect on some of these tools based on running them, right? So if you take Anago, which is essentially our is the brains behind the operation for for some of release engineering. Anago is an 1800 line, 1800 plus, I think 1857, a line Bash script right now, and that is not the best. Especially because I feel that a lot of the time that these tools have been around, there has been minimal improvement to these tools because people are scared to touch an 1800 line bash script. And that totally makes sense. If you want to see what Anago looks like, that's there. Anago is then wrapped by GCB Manager. GCB Manager handles all of the bits that Anago does and moves that to and wraps it in Google Cloud Build, right? So that's what we use to do the staging and releasing of Kubernetes version, the individual Kubernetes versions, and we also use that to do the promotion of those staged artifacts into buckets that the public would access, right? So all of that to say, these tools like Anago, GCB Manager, Prin, Fine Green Build, a bunch of the other ones that you would find in the release repo, also source a set of bash libraries, right? And those bash libraries have similar lengths, right? So there's the common library, which does a lot of common stuff, setting up logs, being able to rotate logs, being able to have common exits, common traps for things, so on and so forth. Then there's like the gitlib library and release lib library. So those do what the names kind of suggest, right? One figures out things for Git, like what's the right Git auth URL or something, as well as and then the release one does, okay, well, this is the function to upload to GCS, right? So you take all of those things, and so we have one piece where we have to rewrite the tools, right? And then we have a piece where we have to rewrite the libraries as well, right? So the idea behind this PR was to basically take a small chunk of some of this stuff and show what it might look like to abstract the libraries that we're currently using in Bash into Go, as well as write a tool around some of that stuff, right? So that is very, very, very early pass of this work, or what we can potentially do there. And I think that by starting on this, maybe I'll start the wheels in motion of people getting excited about potentially rewriting another one of these tools, right? So that's for any of the release manager associates that are on the call. That is one of the potential things that you could work on, right? We just need to figure out a good flow for people getting involved in that and what it could look like. So I think I wanted to use this PR as kind of like a framework for like, hey, this is what we could do. Do we have questions? How, like, is the design wrong? It's simple, but it moves the ball forward. So if anyone has questions, comments, concerns, if they're interested in working on some of that stuff, we can figure out how to chunk that up and give to you. Well, all right. I would love reviews on the Debs PR that I have open for refactoring some of the way that we do the package definitions. It would be great to have one from you, Lubomir, if you're available. Have some time to take a poke at it, as well as looks like Fabrizio dropped. But people who are consuming this stuff, I want to make sure that it looks right for them. And if not, it does sound like we need to continue gathering some requirements from individual SIGs and places. Right? So any topics remaining? Anything anyone wants to discuss? I realized we did not do introductions. I see some This is a relatively new call, but I see some new faces on the call. I see some usernames that I've seen on GitHub but never seen in real life, so it's nice to see all of you. This is a call that happens, it's bi-weekly, Mondays. It shadows the SIG release call, basically alternating Mondays. We do SIG release or release engineering, so please feel free to stop by. It's always lovely to see all you folks. That said, everyone take it easy. Happy Monday. Enjoy your days.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.